Today we are taking up Sonnet 116, Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds by William Shakespeare. Now, about sonnet number 116, we see that this sonnet is seen amongst the most abiding expressions of true love. It would come as a surprise that it was addressed to a young man and not to a lady. It is a part of the series of sonnets that Shakespeare wrote to Mr. W.H., who is described as the only begetter of the sonnets, as the dedication puts it. Critics believe W.H. as either Henry Wriothesley, Earl of Southampton, or William Herbert, Earl of Pembroke. Along with sonnets 18, that is, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, and 130, My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun, sonnet 116 is one of the most famous poems in the entire sequence. The definition of love that it provides is among the most often quoted and anthologized in the poetic canon. Essentially, this sonnet presents the extreme ideal of romantic love. It never changes, it never fades. It outlasts death and admits no flaw. What is more, it insists that this ideal is the only love that can be called true. If love is mortal, changing, or impermanent, the speaker writes, then no man ever loved. The basic division of this poem's argument into the various parts of the sonnet form is extremely simple. The first quatrain says what love is not. That is, it is not changeable. The second quatrain says what it is, meaning a fixed guiding star unshaken by tempest. The third quatrain says more specifically what it is not. That is, it is not time's fool, subject to change with the passage of time. And the couplet announces the speaker's certainty about it. What gives this poem its rhetorical and emotional power is not its complexity, rather, it is the force of its linguistic and emotional conviction. Now, on the screen, you have the poem, along with it, you have the paraphrase to see if you do not understand the poem as I explain it. Taking it quatrain wise, first quatrain, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Now, see the first line. Let me not to the marriage of true minds. Now, marriage means the unity. When people are united, that is the marriage of true minds. Now, when we talk about true minds, what Shakespeare actually means here is faithful people. When faithful together get united in marriage, admit impediments. Now, impediments basically refers to the time when people get married and the pastor, he asks to the public, if any of you know cause or just impediments why these two people should not be joined together in holy matrimony, please speak up now. That's the way marriages are conducted. So everybody is given a chance to say if they have anything against the bride or the bridegroom right at that moment. So that's impediment. So he says, let me not to the marriage of true minds. When true people, true faithful people are coming together, let me not allow anyone to try and stop it in any way. Let nobody come and say any kind of thing against them. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds. If love changes when it sees the other person changing, if love changes with changes in circumstances, then that love was not true. Or bends with the remover to remove. If it deviates, if it bends with the departure of the lover, then also that was not true love. This sonnet attempts to define love by telling both what it is and what it is not. In the first quatrain, the speaker says that love, the marriage of true minds, is perfect and unchanging. It does not admit impediments, that is, it does not change when it finds changes in the loved ones. The marriage of true minds is a phrase, as I said, widely used and difficult to understand, at least in the way Shakespeare meant it. When we speak of a marriage of the minds, we get around the problem of what true means. True here actually means, as I said, faithful people. True minds doesn't mean authentic minds, but faithful people. truth in the Renaissance still had fidelity as one of its primary senses. The first four lines reveal the poet's pleasure in love, that it is constant and strong, and will not alter when it alteration finds. The following lines proclaim that true love is indeed an ever fixed mark which will survive any crisis. We're talking about the second quatrain. Let's first look at the second quatrain. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to ever wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. So in the second quatrain, we find he refers to love as what? An ever fixed mark, that is the North Star, which is known as the guiding star, and the name is Polaris. So just like the lost ships at sea look at Polaris and know the direction in which they have to move, love is just like that. When there is tempest in one person's life, love can bring you out of that tempest. It is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempest and is never shaken. So the wandering bark, it is the star to every wandering bark whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. So that star, that Polaris, what Polaris is to the wandering bark, what fixed marks, that is like something like a lighthouse, is amidst tempest, amidst storms. So also love is a fixed mark. It's like a North Star, the Polaris, to people who are shaken up in their lives, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Maybe you might someday end up measuring the height of the North Star. You might be able to find out the height of it, but you will never be able to find out the value of it. So we find, that he talks about this guiding star Polaris is mentioned by Shakespeare in other plays also, like in Much Ado About Nothing. In Act 2, Scene 1, he talks about it, and in Julius Caesar also in Act 3, Scene 1, he talks about it. So the star to every wandering bark is basically Polaris, what we were talking about, and that ever fixed mark is a lighthouse, which is a mark in the sea which helps the ships with its light to come to a destination. In the second quatrain, the speaker tells what love is through a metaphor, a guiding star to lost ships, and that is not susceptible to storm. It looks on tempest and is never shaken, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. The subject here is still the North Star. The star's true value can never truly be calculated, although its height can be measured. In lines 7-8, the poem claims that we may be able to measure love to some degree, but this does not mean we fully understand it. Love's actual worth cannot be known. It remains a mystery. The following lines proclaim that true love is indeed an ever fixed mark which will survive any crisis that comes in your life. If you follow this point, you can see how Shakespeare gets on the topic of constancy in love. Love really isn't love at all, he says, if it bends under circumstances or alters because the world around it is in constant state of alteration. Love isn't an affair of convenience but resolute, like an ever fixed mark, a sea mark, some static object, like I said, a lighthouse, like a sea mark. Love should weather all tempests without tribulation, serving like a star to wandering barks. The world and its lovers too are errant and need stable principles for guidance. Love is imagined as an almost external thing, beyond the shifting sensations of the lover. Let's take the third quatrain now. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. So he says, love is not time's fool, meaning love is not at the mercy of time. Though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. His refers to time here. Time is being personified. You can see the capital T in time. So time has got a sickle. A sickle is what? An instrument with which you cut. So time has got a sickle and it cuts things away. Just like rosy lips and cheeks. Rosy lips and cheeks come within the compass, meaning come within the range of time, and time cuts it off, meaning with the passage of time, rosy lips become faded and cheeks also lose their beauty. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks. With the passage of time, love does not alter, it does not change, but bears it out even to the edge of doom, until doomsday, until the end of the world. Love continues to be just as it is, it does not change. In the third quatrain, the speaker again describes what love is not. It is not susceptible to time. Though beauty fades in time as rosy lips and cheeks come within his bending sickle's compass, love does not change with hours and weeks. Instead, it bears it out even to the edge of doom. The beautiful images in the lines, love's not time's fool, brings alive Father Time's scythe. It seems like it encircles as if in an embrace before chopping off the signs of youth, rosy lips and cheeks. And like so many fragile spring blooms, these are said to be gathered only to be cut off by the mower. We come to the final couplet. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. So he says, whatever I say about love, if it is proved wrong, then I will say that I never did write anything. And if I'm proved wrong, I'll say I never wrote anything, and I will say that no man ever actually fell in love. In the couplet, the speaker attests to his certainty that love is what he says about it. In the final couplet, the poet declares that if he is mistaken about the constant, unmovable nature of perfect love, then he must take back all his writings on love, truth, and faith. Moreover, he adds that if he has in fact judged love inappropriately, no man has ever really loved in the ideal sense that the poet professes. Shakespeare is confident that he will not be proven wrong when he states, if this be error upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. In Sonnet 116, if we look at the language, the chief pause in sense, that is the caesura, is after the 12th line. 75% of the words are monosyllables, meaning single syllabled words. Only 3 contain more syllables than 2. None belong in any degree to the vocabulary of poetic diction. There are 3 run-on lines, meaning the sense continues to the next line. 1 pair of double endings. There is nothing to remark about the rhyming except that the happy blending of open and closed vowels. In short, the poet has employed 110 of the simplest words in the language and the simplest rhyme scheme AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG to produce a poem which has about it no strangeness except the strangeness of perfection. The language is not remarkable for its imagery or metaphoric range. In fact, its imagery, particularly in the third quatrain of time wielding a sickle that ravages beauty's rosy lips and cheeks, is rather standard within the sonnets, and its major metaphor, love as a guiding star, is hardly startling in its originality. But the language is extraordinary in that it frames its discussion of the passion of love within a very restrained, very intensely disciplined rhetorical structure. With a masterful control of rhythm and variation of tone, the heavy balance of love's not time's fool to open the third quatrain, the declamatory oh no to begin the second quatrain, the speaker makes an almost legalistic argument for the eternal passion of love, and the result is that the passion seems stronger and more urgent for the restraint in the speaker's tone. Now, if you have any questions based on sonnet number 116, please feel free to ask and I will answer them. Thank you.